This is the 4G15 to 4G63 turbo 91 to 94 engine wiring harness swap. I'm going to be going through the engine bay portion of the swap and then the interior portion. Start out with the ground wire. This is the stock Mirage ground wire. It runs to the grounding point on the body, and then it runs straight to, kind of parallels the starter wiring harness and goes into the starter. It's grounded on the bottom starter bolt, and the starter wiring harness has a power wire that comes from the battery and then a black and yellow ignition trigger wire which actually triggers it to turn on. Stock Mirage battery harness. One of the leads goes right to the starter, the other one goes into the fuse box wiring harness, and this powers the fuse box. This comes directly off the battery. On this fuse box harness you have one plug that is not used. I believe this might be for power windows or an option that this car did not have. And the other harness is going to be going into the car. So this is going to come out of the 1.5 liter harness. This plug is actually from the turbo harness. This harness is from the 3 fused junction block on the Eclipse turbo harness that bolts right onto the battery. As you can see, this one, black and white, goes into one of the connectors that's not used. That's inside the car. I'll show you that later, but this does not have to be hooked up to anything. This red wire also does not have to be hooked up to anything. This black and red wire, which used to be the power wire for the MPI relay ECU, is going to go right into this plug, and this goes back into the fuse box. So we're using the stock Mirage ECI fuse for this wire. So with the ignition on, this wire gets power, and then this is going to power your MPI relay. This blue and white wire that is also on this harness is gone. This blue and white wire on this plug next to the MPI power is the power steering pressure switch. This goes into pin number 5 on the ECU, and when you move the steering wheel and activate the power steering, this wire is going to trigger an idle increase, so your car's idle doesn't drop when you put the load on the engine. So find a corresponding wire that goes into the vehicle. This one should utilize the stock harness and pop out somewhere on that kick panel connector that we're going to show you on the interior portion of the DVD. Also coming off the 2 liter harness, you'll find a plug with 2 red colored wires, a black and yellow, and actually 2 black yellows. And this could actually get plugged into this plug, which is used from the 1.5 liter harness. The red wires are the backup light switch on the transmission, and the yellow-black you can see branch off, and they're joined at the single plug, which you should be easily be able to find on the Mirage power / starter harness, and that, if you remember, is the trigger wire for the starter. So this black yellow gets connected to the black yellow. This goes inside the car right to the MPI relay, and that's what's going to crank your starter. These 2 connectors are unused connectors on the 2 liter harness. These plug into the fuse box, I'm assuming, on the Eclipse. This thick red wire here turns out to be the red wire that was on the fuse block that bolts right to the battery. These other wires, I'm assuming, give power to the fuse box from the battery on the Eclipse. The final extension of the harness is the MAF plug and the turbo boost control solenoid, and that's also on this. Everyone knows what that does. The next plug on the harness, you'll see I just routed this behind the brake booster. If you can get it underneath the booster, that might be even better, but behind it works as well too. The wiper motor plugs right in off the Eclipse turbo harness. Here you'll find the rear window defogger relay for the Eclipse. This is not needed, but you'll see right on there it says RDEF, and then there's a little something here that should be probably grounded. The next plug is the timing adjustment plug. Take this cap off, ground the pin to set the base timing. And you'll also notice that behind this mess, I stuck the turbo harness through the stock hole and used the Mirage grommet, so it's a tight stock fit in there. Eventually what I'm going to do is cut all the loom and rerun the wiring, re-tape up everything, and just basically eliminate the connectors I don't need for a completely clean look. Because it works the way it is in now, but if you want something cleaner, I would recommend getting rid of the connectors you don't need and redoing it all nice and pretty. Moving along, after the timing plug, this harness will branch off a little bit. There's a single plug here. Not sure what it does, but it's not vital to the engine functioning. This next plug is the cruise control plug. There's also a plug that goes to the idle speed control motor. Further down on the harness, you'll find the knock sensor plug. Here you will find the injector resistor plug. Don't confuse this with another plug because there are a bunch of different plugs that can plug into this injector resistor pack. You want the one with the red wire and the 3 black wires. The final plug on this harness is for your solenoids, which you might remove. Fuel pressure solenoid, exhaust recirculation. It's not necessary in a polluting, dirty engine. Further down on the harness, you'll find the Coil Pack plug and the resistor plug. And following the other branch of the harness, you'll get the fuel injectors, the TPS, and the cam angle sensor. The remaining wires go to the oxygen sensor and this yellow-green wire. This yellow-green wire goes to the gauge cluster temperature gauge. This top sensor is for the air conditioning, which you may or may not need. And it's these 2 green, yellow, and green and black wires. And then there's also another temperature switch. I believe it's for the ECU, so it knows how hot the car is getting. This is the wiring mess you'll soon be faced with when you take on the swap. Once you get the wiring harness through the stock hole, this is what it's going to look like. Here you have 3 connectors that splice into the dash harness, and you have the main wiring harness next to it. When you remove the 1.5 liter harness, there's going to be a extension for the MPI relay, and there's going to be a majority of the wires that go into the engine bay, similar to this harness. But there's also going to be a few wires coming off of the ECU, similar to this, that go into this dash harness. So what I did was cut the wires that went to the engine, and I left the wire that was going to go to this dash harness connected, so I can figure out what would have to be reconnected and map out what this wire does. But you don't have to do that because you have this DVD to help you along. So basically, cut everything. If you want to be on the safe side, leave the wires that are connected to this dash harness so you can reference the DVD and easily figure out which wire does what. This harness and plug is basically the link between your ignition, gauge cluster, everything that has to do with power, fuel pump, and that is the connection between that and your new harness, your new MPI relay, your gauges, that type of thing. You'll also find a secondary connector next to the dash plug, and this connector has two black whites. One's a little bit thicker than the other, a black yellow, and a yellow green. This yellow green is for your air conditioning system. It's not hooked up right now because I don't have anything to hook it up to. This yellow green is actually the refrigerant temperature sensor wire. The thinner black and white wire will have to get tapped into the MPI relay, and it's tapped into the black and green wire. That's your fuel pump turn on wire. And this black green is pin number 2 on the MPI control relay. So when you turn the key, this wire gets power, fuel pump turns on. This thicker black and white wire is going to get tapped into the MPI relay as well. That's going to get tapped into the black and white wire on the MPI relay, which I believe is pin number 3 if you're looking at it this way. And this is the ignition switch. This turns on the MPI relay. It on the ECU tells the car that everything is on, and it gives power to the coil pack and the higher output devices. Thick black and yellow, and this comes from the ignition switch, and it's part of the starter relay, and that'll get spliced into the black and yellow, properly spliced into the black and yellow wire that goes into the MPI relay. And that black and yellow is the starter relay. That'll trigger your starter when you turn the key. And that is located on the bottom of the MPI plug. This black and white wire now has power, and you can verify that by changing the fuel pump wire. And that turns on the fuel pump, which is kind of neat. So now you've given everything power here. That's the most important part of the swap, because these wires are easy to get confused and easy to mess up. Another important part of this harness is these ground wires that are conveniently all put together. That needs to be grounded on the stock location or whatever other location you can find as a suitable ground. That's vital for your electronic components. Alright, if you remember back in the beginning how we spliced that black-red wire in near the fuse block, that's this last wire in the MPI relay, and that's comes off the main fusible link into the relay. These two red wires located above it are both power wires. It gives the ECU power, It gives all the sensors in the engine power, such as the MAF, TPS, things like that. The next black-white is the one we tapped for that ignition switch wire, constant power when the switch is on. The wire next to that is that green and black. That goes to the fuel pump. The number 6 wire is a black wire. That's a ground. The number 7 is a white and red, and that goes into the ECU. Pin number 56, that should all be integrated on the harness though, so you shouldn't have to worry about splicing anything. Number 8 pin is black and blue. That goes into pin 63 and 66 of the ECU. Pin number 9 is the black-yellow starter wire. And again, pin number 10 is the black-red power wire. Now I'm going to go through these wires on this dash harness. Most of these wires are going to go to the ECU. When I told you to leave them connected earlier on the yellow plugs, that's where the majority of these go to. Pin number 1, black-yellow, that's a refrigerant temperature sensor. The second wire, white wire, is the self-diagnostics connector for getting check engine light codes and hooking up the data logger. Same with the yellow wire right next to it. This number 4 white wire is the tack wire. If you're using a 91 to 94 coil pack, you need the tack filter off a 90, and it's just a little electronic filter basically with one output wire. You're going to want to connect this wire to the output wire of the tack filter, and this goes into the gauge cluster. Number 5, yellow-white. This is the gauge, the coolant temperature gauge. I'll show you where to connect that in a minute. There's a blue-black wire here, but it doesn't come out on my harness. It might be for the automatic or some features I didn't have, but it obviously wasn't connected to anything because it's not there. The first pin on the bottom is a white-green. That is the battery backup wire. That should have 12 volts at all times. This yellow-green next to it is the brake level sensor. This is going to be connected to your master cylinder, the warning light when the brake fluid gets too low. And then these next 4 wires are the wiper motor. And then there's a yellow-blue, which is the check engine light. And a yellow-white, which is the reed switch. This yellow-white wire, second from the last, is for the reed switch in the gauge cluster. And the final wire, the green, is the auto compressor control wire for the air conditioning. Conveniently enough, located next to the yellow ECU plugs is another white plug off of the Eclipse turbo harness. Most of these wires are the wires that we're going to be tapping into, because if in a perfect world this plug would plug into that connector, but it doesn't. So you can either find a connector off an Eclipse or make another Mirage connector and integrate these two, or just splice them in. Whatever you really want to do, it's up to you for a clean install. So looking at this white connector from the back, 3 wires, number 4, number 5, yellow and white. You're going to want to cut those and splice your yellow and white diagnostics connector wires, which is connector 2 and 3. That's going to connect your harness to the ECU. The wire right next to it is the check engine light wire. It's a red and green wire. You want to cut that and splice it to yellow-blue, which is pin number 13. It's one of the last wires on the bottom, yellow-blue check engine light. The final wire to splice is the red and black. And that wire is a white and green wire, which is on the bottom of this dash plug, and that is the battery backup, white and green. Alright, there are 2 yellow and white wires. One is directly next to the tack wire, and that one you're going to want to splice into the white plug located right here. You're going to want to splice it into the yellow-green wire, and that's the same yellow-green wire that I showed you on the thermostat housing. The number 14 yellow-white wire on the bottom of this connector is going to go to that same white connector, but it's going to go to the yellow and white wire, which is that reed switch. And these connectors are as far as they can come down, just because that's just the length of the harness. Most of these wires you won't be using, but again, you can use this as an access point to the engine bay. So you can find one of these wires in the engine bay and connect whatever you like to it, and you'll have a connection inside the car. Again, the wire, or the wiper motor wires, are also found on this white connector. Just match up the colors, they're all the same. The wiper motor wires are on the bottom of this dash connector, so you have working wipers at that point. The ECU receives its power right here. The power is the red wires, and those come directly from the output of the MPI relay. So the MPI relay gets all power first, and once the key is turned, the MPI relay gives power to the ECU.